Build an ark. 3 words that would change everything. Noah had just heard the voice of God describe something impossible to imagine. Water covering the entire earth, every living creature wiped out, an entire civilization erased. And then, in the middle of that apocalyptic revelation, construction instructions. Make it of cypress wood, 450 feet long, 75 wide, 45 high. 3 decks, compartments. Seal it with pitch inside and out. There will be a window above and a door on the side. Noah heard every word, every measurement, every specification. And when the voice stopped, when silence returned, Noah stood on dry land under a clear blue sky, looking at the normal world around him. And he understood something terrifying. God had given him exact dimensions, but not the instruction manual. He hadn't explained how to cut down giant trees without machinery. He hadn't shown him how to move tons of wood without enough draft animals. He hadn't detailed carpentry techniques to assemble such a massive structure. He had only told him what to build, not how to build it. It was an order that required absolute obedience combined with total initiative. Faith to believe it had to be done, wisdom to figure out how to do it, and time, years, maybe decades, to complete it. Noah looked at his hands. Farmers' hands, not shipbuilders' hands. Hands that would soon be calloused, bleeding, burned by boiling pitch. Hands that would need to figure out how to transform a divine order into a physical structure, without asking how, without questioning why, only obeying. And the first step was obvious but intimidating. Find the place where something impossible could be built. Where do you build a giant ship when there is no sea nearby? The question seems absurd, but Noah had no choice. The divine command was specific in dimensions, but silent about location. So Noah had to trust that God would give him the wisdom to make decisions the command did not explicitly specify. He probably looked around and thought, as any builder would think, I need space, a lot of space. Because 450 feet is longer than a football field, and 75 feet wide means you can't build on any narrow piece of land. But here is the first level of obedience. Choosing the right place without God telling you which place is right. Every decision became an act of faith. Choosing flat land, trusting that God would approve that decision. Looking for firm ground that wouldn't sink under the weight. Believing that common sense was part of the divine wisdom he'd been given. Placing himself near a forest so he wouldn't have to transport wood from far away. Faith that practical efficiency honored God as much as literal obedience. Then came the brutal work no one mentions. Preparing the land. Removing stones, tearing out roots, compacting soil without excavators or trucks. Just shovels, picks, brute strength, and time. Weeks, maybe months of work before cutting a single tree. But there is another detail that shows strategic thinking guided by faith. Drainage. When it rains on a poorly planned job site, it becomes a swamp. Tools sink, wood rots, work stops. So Noah probably created drainage channels around the area, small trenches dug strategically so the ground stayed dry even during storms. And while Noah sweated digging, leveling, preparing, his neighbors passed by. Some laughed, others shook their heads. A man preparing a giant construction site to build a ship far from any river or ocean. Madness. It could only be madness. But here is what they didn't understand. Noah wasn't building for the world that existed. He was building for the world that was about to disappear underwater. Every shovel of earth removed was a physical declaration of faith in a prophecy not yet fulfilled. Every drainage channel carved said, "I believe God will do what he promised, even if I see no evidence." Weeks, maybe months later, the land was ready. Flat, firm, drained. But now came the challenge that made everything before look small. Getting enough wood to build something the size of a 4-story building. God had specified cypress wood. Not just any wood. Cypress, trees that take decades, sometimes centuries to grow. Tall trees with thick, heavy trunks, a single one of them can weigh several tons. And to build a structure 450 feet long, hundreds of trees, maybe thousands. Here is another layer of obedience that goes unnoticed. Noah did not question why cypress specifically. He didn't ask, "Can I use pine? It's easier to cut." He didn't propose more efficient alternatives. God said cypress, so cypress it would be, even if that meant years of additional work. Cutting down a giant tree with a bronze axe is not like chopping firewood. Bronze dulls quickly. You strike, strike, strike at the same point. Wood chips fly, your arms ache, your hands bleed. And after hours, the cut is still not halfway through the trunk. Every axe swing was a renewed commitment. God ordered this. I continue even if it hurts. I continue even if progress is slow. I continue even if no one else believes. 2 men work together, one on each side, alternating blows to keep the rhythm. Shem and Ham on one tree, Japheth and Noah on another. Day after day, year after year. And when the trunk finally began to give, came the most dangerous moment. Where would it fall? A 60-foot tree falling in the wrong direction can kill anyone nearby. It can fall on other trees and get stuck. It can crack when it hits the ground and become useless. So Noah and his sons probably cut strategic wedges to guide the fall. They tied ropes at the top to pull it in the right direction. And when the tree finally fell with a crash that echoed through the forest, it wasn't just a physical victory. It was a spiritual confirmation. One more tree for obedience. One more trunk for God's plan. But the work was only beginning. Because now they had to move that giant trunk to the construction site. And how do you move something the size of a bus without wheels, tractors, or cranes? A mature cypress trunk easily weighs several tons, lying on the forest floor, immovable. The most likely solution was the same used by Egyptians and Mesopotamians: wooden rollers. Cut thinner logs, place several under the large trunk, tie ropes to the front, and begin to pull. As the trunk moves forward, rolling on the cylinders, you take the rollers from behind and place them in front. Slow, brutally exhausting, but effective. However, here is the detail that complicates everything. Uneven ground. Rolling trunks on flat ground is already difficult. On slopes, valleys, stones, dangerous. A trunk rolling out of control down a hill becomes a deadly weapon. It can crush whoever guides it. It can hit rocks and crack. It can fall into ravines and be lost entirely. This is why, before moving any trunk, Noah likely had to prepare the pathways. Level ground, remove large stones, create wide trails. Weeks of extra work just to safely transport the wood. And each extra week was a test of patience. When will I finish? When will the flood come? Am I working fast enough? But God did not give timelines. He only said, build. So Noah built, trusting that God's timing was perfect, even if he didn't understand it. And there was another problem: strength. Even with rollers, you need many men pulling ropes at the same time. Noah had 3 sons, 4 men total. Could they do it alone? Difficult. They probably hired local workers, people who needed money and didn't care about the strange reasons behind the construction. Every trunk that reached the site represented days of effort, sore muscles, ropes snapping at the worst moment. And while some planks dried, stacked with spaces for air circulation, Noah kept cutting more trees. An endless cycle of work. But soon would come the part that would truly test his skill as a builder, raising the structure without collapsing or sinking. How do you raise a 3-story structure without it collapsing before it's finished? The answer begins with something most people never consider: the keel. The main central beam that acts as the spine of any vessel. Without it, you only have a pile of unattached boards. But here is the technical and spiritual challenge. The ark's keel needed to be 450 feet long. No tree in the world is that size. Therefore, Noah had to join multiple massive beams, one fitted into another, creating a continuous line. Each joint had to be perfect. Mortise and tenon joints locked with hardwood pegs. Because if the keel cracked or split, the entire ark would split as well. And here Noah faced a dilemma. God had not given instructions on carpentry techniques. What type of joint to use? What angle of cut? How many pegs per joint? Noah made these decisions, using practical wisdom, believing that God expected him to use intelligence alongside obedience. Faith does not mean turning your brain off. Faith means using everything God gave you, including your ability to reason, to fulfill what He commanded. Then came the ribs, curved beams rising from the sides, giving shape to the hull. But how do you bend wood without breaking it? Steam and heat. You warm the wood slowly, allowing it to become flexible. Then you bend it little by little, fixing it into the desired shape until it cools and hardens. A slow, delicate process. A cracked rib means weeks of work wasted. Now think of the scale. Dozens of giant ribs needed to be fitted into the keel, evenly spaced, all at the exact angle. A mistake of a few degrees, and the structure becomes twisted, unbalanced, unstable. So Noah probably used taut cords as guides, careful markings, stone plumb lines to check verticality. And even so, adjusting a multi-ton beam into perfect position required coordinated brute strength, primitive pulleys, levers, men pulling ropes in unison. Every beam installed was a small victory. Every day the structure remained, standing was confirmation. I'm on the right track. God sustains what He ordered me to build. And here is another critical detail: diagonal reinforcements. Cross beams forming triangles. Why? Because triangles are the most stable geometric shape, impossible to deform without breaking. So the internal structure was a complex web of interlaced wood, distributing weight and resisting pressure. When the ark's skeleton finally stood, Noah looked at that giant structure and realized, now comes the part that will determine whether it floats or sinks, sealing every crack, every joint, every microscopic split. Because a single failure would be enough to kill everyone inside. Pitch. Boiled plant resin turned into a sticky, toxic, boiling paste. The Bible is specific. You will cover it with pitch inside and out. This double command saved everything, because pitch on the outside alone is not enough. Water finds its way in. It seeps underneath, rotting wood from the inside out. Therefore, every inch had to be sealed on both sides. Here, Noah faced another act of faith. How much pitch is enough? 1 layer? 3? 5? God didn't specify, so Noah had to decide, knowing that skimping on pitch could mean death for everyone, but applying too much would add unnecessary weight and consume resources. Every technical decision became an act of faith. Is this enough, God? Does this fulfill what you commanded? And without an audible answer, Noah kept working, trusting that God would not let him make a fatal mistake. But here is the part few imagine: applying pitch inside the ark. Enclosed spaces, dark, without proper ventilation. Toxic vapors concentrated, making the air almost unbreathable. Working inside meant coming out frequently for fresh air, going back in, applying more, coming out again. Hours of interrupted work, burns on hands, irritated skin. And it wasn't a single layer, multiple layers. Waiting for it to dry, applying another, checking for cracks, reapplying where needed. A process that took weeks, maybe months. And while Noah worked in dark, toxic spaces, dizzy from the fumes, hands burned by boiling resin, what sustained him? Not the pleasure of work, not evidence that it was worth it, only the voice of God in his memory. Do it. Trust. Obey. But the true test of the pitch would only come when the ark was in the water. Until then, it was impossible to know whether any joint had failed, whether any microscopic crack would allow infiltration. So each application was as much an act of faith as a technical act. When the last layer of pitch finally dried, the ark was sealed. But now came the challenge of dividing the massive interior into organized compartments, because thousands of animals would need to live inside for more than a year. The Bible gives a clue: 3 decks, and mentions compartments. In Hebrew, chinim, which literally means nests or cells. Small separated spaces. But why? Because without divisions, there would be chaos. Animals fighting, predators attacking prey, diseases spreading quickly. So every species needed its own space, walls between them, safety. But here is the engineering challenge: building internal walls without compromising the structure. Every wall adds weight, changes load distribution. The most likely logic is heavy animals on the lowest deck. Elephants, rhinos, hippos. Low center of gravity prevents the ark from tipping. Medium animals on the second deck. Lions, bears, horses, and the light ones, birds and smaller creatures, on the upper deck. Strategic weight distribution for stability. But again, Noah didn't receive a detailed architectural plan. He had to reason: if I put the heaviest animals above, the ark will be unstable. Common sense applied with faith that God expected him to think, not obey blindly. And here's another problem no one considers: waste. Thousands of animals producing waste every day. Without a drainage system, the ark would become a toxic sewer in weeks. Diseases would kill everyone before the flood ended. So there were likely sloped channels on the floors, small grooves directing liquids to specific points, perhaps openings on lower sides, allowing waste to flow out once the ark was floating. Simple but effective. And ventilation. The Bible mentions a window above, but that's not enough to ventilate 3 decks. There were probably strategic side openings, protected by overhangs to prevent water from entering, but allowing air circulation. Noah designed each of these systems without divine instruction. And here is the beauty of practical faith. God gave the framework, dimensions, basic materials, purpose, but expected Noah to apply intelligence, experience, and reasoning to fill in the details. Faith is not passivity, waiting for God to do everything. Faith is partnership. God commands the impossible, the human applies everything he has to achieve it, and together they accomplish what neither could do alone. The ark's door could not be small. Giraffes needed to enter, elephants, animals of all sizes, so it had to be a huge opening. And here is the engineering problem. The larger the opening, the weaker the wall. It becomes a structural vulnerability. Therefore, location mattered. The Bible mentions that the door was on the side, not front or back. This makes structural sense. Side walls distribute pressure better than ends, but the door needed heavy reinforcements around it, extra beams forming a robust frame, thicker wood, stronger joints, all to compensate for the structural weakness of the opening. And here is the most fascinating detail of the entire construction. The Bible does not mention Noah installing bolts or locks. Why? Because it says God himself closed the door. Think about what this means. Noah built a giant door without a permanent closing system, trusting that when the time came, God himself would seal it. This is architectural faith. I will build as far as I can build, and trust that God will complete what only He can complete. Still, the seal around the door had to be perfect. So likely extra layers of pitch, perhaps flexible material at the edges, something like plant fibers soaked in resin working as a primitive gasket. When the door was finally installed, tested and sealed, the construction was complete. Decades of work, thousands of hours, mountains of wood transformed into a structure that defied logic. How do you test a giant vessel without putting it in the water? You don't. You can't. The ark was built on dry land, far from any body of water large enough. So the entire work of decades depended on mental calculations, practical experience, and faith that the proportions God gave would work. But Noah could do some final checks. Walking through the entire structure, checking every joint, looking for cracks that appeared while the pitch dried, testing beam firmness, pushing walls to feel if they were solid or if anything gave way. He probably also loaded supplies progressively. Sacks of grain, bundles of hay, jars of water. Watching how the structure reacted to the added weight. Listening. Because wood under pressure makes noises. It creaks, groans, pops. And if something were wrong, Noah would hear it. But the real surprise came when the animals began to appear. The Bible says they came to Noah 2 by 2. They were not hunted. They were not dragged. They came on their own. Imagine the scene. Animals migrating spontaneously from every direction. Predators walking peacefully beside prey. Birds flying and landing near the entrance. Reptiles crawling. All converging on the same place, as if guided by an invisible force. Here, after decades of brutal human work, unshakable faith, and meticulous obedience, God showed that this had never been merely a human project. Noah built what he could build, but God would do what only God could do. And here is the detail that completes it. Each animal went straight to its compartment, without confusion, without fights, as if they knew exactly where they belonged. This was no longer a human project. It was something beyond Noah's ability to control or explain. For decades, Noah had worked by faith, cutting trees he couldn't imagine becoming a ship, transporting trunks without knowing if the structure would hold, applying pitch without being able to test if it would seal, building compartments without knowing if animals would truly come. And now, seeing lions walking peacefully beside lambs, seeing bears obediently entering their assigned spaces, Seeing thousands of creatures converging without chaos or violence, Noah understood. His part had been to obey with excellence. God's part was to make the impossible possible. When the last animal entered, Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives entered too. 8 people in total. And then what was written happened. God closed the door. The construction was complete. Decades of obedience without seeing the result. Years of faith without physical evidence. Countless days of brutal work without knowing if the promised moment would come. All culminating in this instant, God sealing with his own hands what Noah had built with his. The closed door was not just a physical seal, it was a divine declaration. What I commanded has been obeyed. What I promised will be fulfilled. What man built in faith, I will preserve in power. And now the true test began, not the construction. The construction had been approved by the divine architect himself. Now came the test of whether Noah and his family could survive inside that ark through all the days of the coming flood. Every axe strike had been a physical prayer. Every transported trunk had been a declaration of faith. Every layer of pitch had been renewed trust. And when the first drops began to fall, when the fountains of the deep broke open, when the water began to rise exactly as God had warned, every technical decision, every practical calculation, every moment of doubt overcome was vindicated. The ark floated, not because Noah was a perfect engineer. It floated because God is faithful, and obedience, even when it doesn't fully understand, even when it hurts, even when others laugh, is never in vain. If this story of engineering, faith, and unbreakable obedience impacted you as much as it impacted us while researching it, show it right now. Give this film a warm like. That like button is your vote for us to bring more biblical stories in this cinematic format. Share this video with someone who needs to see how faith is built day by day, blow by blow, decision after decision. And subscribe, because if this video goes viral, if you all show us you want more content like this, I promise we will return with more epic biblical stories told like movies. The story of David facing giants, Moses dividing seas, Daniel surviving lions. Stories of faith that change the world, told with all the intensity they deserve. But that depends on you. Your like decides whether this continues. Your share decides how many more people will see these stories. And your subscription ensures you won't miss the next episode. See you in the next biblical film.